At Eastern Bank, we believe that growing business should also grow the community. That's why we work to give all business owners what they need to take their dreams to the next level. Our dedication to small businesses and communities has inspired us to create the Equity Alliance for Business program and become the #1 SBA lender in Massachusetts for 15 years running. We're proud to be here for all businesses, big and small. See the good we can do for you by visiting easternbank.com/business.
This is what it sounds like.
Member FDIC.
Sometimes things in the world of technology are complicated and need careful explaining. Sometimes they just need a little hard truth.
I don't think anyone is going to buy a banana with crypto at any point in the foreseeable future.
I'm Lizzie O'Leary, the host of Slate's What Next TBD, your clear-eyed guide to technology, power, and the future. Friday and Sunday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Shirley Leung. It's Earth Week, and I've got climate change on my mind. It's one of those topics I can never get my head around. It affects everything, and it's so complex. You may feel hope, you may feel despair, but you can't ignore it. One of the best thinkers on climate change is Elizabeth Kolbert. She writes for The New Yorker. Elizabeth won a Pulitzer Prize for her book, The Sixth Extinction, about the effects of climate on biodiversity. Her new book is called H is for Hope. She joins us from her home in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. Elizabeth, welcome to Say More.
Thanks for having me.
So you've written multiple award-winning books tackling complex topics like biodiversity and geoengineering. But your new book marks a departure. I mean, it goes through the letters of the alphabet, A to Z. It's got these beautiful illustrations. You know, at first I thought maybe it was a kid's book, but it's not. But it's not quite a graphic novel. It's not quite a coffee table book. Why this format?
Well, from a writer's perspective, the rationale for the format is that climate change is not one story. You know, if you pick up any one piece of it, you can write a good story. There's a million stories about climate change, but that's only one small part of the picture. And I was trying to give people this very big picture, but in short bursts that are pretty easy to digest, that you could read, you know, one at a time. And if you actually got through the alphabet, which you could do at one sitting or not at one sitting, you'd have a pretty good sense of the whole scope and what people are talking about.
Yeah, I think the book took me an hour, and I felt like the book was for someone like me. You know, I'm not a climate denier, yet I'm also not a tree hugger, and you know, I'm not at the point where I'm going to upend my life, change my life, you know, to save the planet, or even reach for a 300-page book on climate change. But after reading this book, I want to read your other books now, and you know, it's almost like it was almost like an appetizer to learning more about climate change.
Well, I'm you know, definitely gratified to hear you say that. I think that a lot of people, you know, everyone's attention is being fought over, as you know, and I have sort of lived with this issue long enough to tell you, you know, very quickly and succinctly that it is, if not the biggest problem in the world today, very, very close to it. It is coming for everyone. This issue should be rising above almost any others. And I wanted to reach people who, you know, as you say, aren't going to pick up that 300-page book, but who need to know. This is sort of what you need to know.
I mean, I think your superpower is distilling it to what's really important and then making me want to know more about the issue. So you in the book, you go from A to Z. You know, you go through literally the letters of the alphabet. And each letter you present a story about climate. And sometimes it's a solution. Sometimes it's a reflection or insight, like K is for kilowatt, W is for weather. I mean, they were a little unpredictable. I mean, you didn't know what to quite expect from the letters. I'm not sure I'm going to get here. here or there, like B,
Yeah.
like the second letter was blah, blah, blah.
Yes, and that came to me in like a moment of epiphany or a flash. B was actually hard, and that was the beginning of the alphabet. A was for Arrhenius, who's really the first person who did what we would call a very, 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 elementary climate model all the way back in the 1890s. That was pretty easy because his name begins with an A. And then
I've never heard of him, but it was fascinating to know that he figured out pretty precisely how the planet would warm, right?
it really is an amazing story. And what he was really interested in, he was a Swedish chemist, really. And he was very interested back in the 1890s, as I said, in what had caused the ice ages. That was very mysterious, but people knew that there had been at least several ice ages in the relatively recent past, and they were searching for answers as to why. And he came up with this theory that it was due to changing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and he sort of set out to prove that mathematically. And he was missing sort of crucial bits of information, but it turned out for interesting reasons that he was very close to what now, modern supercomputers would say.
As a journalist, sometimes I find it hard to get my head around climate change. And sometimes the stories, they all sound the same year after year. So why is it so hard to write about climate change?
Well, I I spent a lot of time thinking about that one. I think one of the reasons that it's hard to write about climate change is it's sort of everything everywhere all at once. It's not a single story. It's not what's a sort of paradigmatic story that journalists like to tell, is a mystery. Someone, it's a cold case and someone solved a cold case. It has a through line and a narrative arc. And climate change is just the accumulated impacts of what all of us are doing every day, very normal, ordinary, boring stuff, taking our kids to soccer or, tapping on our computers, just plugging into the grid or driving around or, taking a vacation. And it's the accumulated effects of all that. So there's no, clear sort of protagonists in the story. And the victims, who are, increasingly apparent as climate change becomes more and more, visible and its impacts are felt quite tangibly, palpably, and often very terribly by more and more people. But the victims are not exactly victims of climate change. They're victims of some disaster, a hurricane, a flood that has been made that much more likely or that much more ferocious by climate change.
One of the things I love about your book, too, is that it's chock full of really eye-opening statistics. And being a longtime business journalist, I love powerful numbers. And the one I can't get out of my head is the fact that humans have added more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere over the past 30 years as they have over the last 30,000. And on top of that, this is despite having global summit after global summit, that began about 30 years ago. So it reminded me a lot about, like you're trying to lose weight and you go on a diet and you end up gaining more weight, And so,
Right.
So what is that all about? How is it that we've had all these, global leaders, year after year meet about cutting carbon dioxide emissions, and yet it's just gotten worse? Much worse.
Well, one of the big forces there, and I hope this comes through, in the book, and it's one of the many complexities, and it's one of the many political complexities, is a lot of it, most of the growth has come from developing countries. So China and India, particularly China surpassed the US as the world's biggest CO2 emitter far earlier than was anticipated back in 2006, and it has kept growing at a really phenomenal rate. And there are all sorts of reasons for that, and it's basically the industrialization of China, and a lot of our manufacturing moved to China, so we just sort of shifted those emissions around. But Now, India also has very rapid, those are the biggest, most populous countries in the world. And when you do that, when you electrify, we sitting in the US would say, oh, well, on one level, that's great. Obviously, people are living better. They are using more energy, but those two are intimately tied up in modern life. And when you do that and you add, you electrify and bring industrialization to very populous parts of the world that haven't had it before, your emissions shoot up, your global emissions shoot up. And that is, in a very, simplistic way, what has happened. And we in the States, in the US, who still have among the highest per capita emissions in the world, we are certainly in no position to tell other countries, that their emissions need to go down. But we can't solve this problem without everyone. So it's a geopolitically very difficult problem.
It's funny because I have this image of China being ahead of us. I mean, yes, they've become very industrialized. They have a lot of factories, but I feel like for some reason I have this image that they've been more aggressive in trying to cut their emissions than we have. But maybe that's a wrong impression, or maybe I'm mixing it all up in my mind.
Well, that's a good question. And unfortunately, the answer is they are both the world's, by far biggest producer of renewable energy and are installing, massive amounts of wind, massive amounts of solar. But they also have and are continuing to build massive amounts of coal.
I see. So
coal-fired power. So both of those things are happening simultaneously. And China is just such a big country that, unless they really ramp down, and I think that the thing that worries people, and the reason that that China's emissions are such a big problem, in addition to the fact that there's simply a lot of emissions, is as they continue to build more coal-fired power plants, people say, well, those aren't just going to be retired. You're not going to build them this year and then next year mothball them. So in the climate circles, people are very worried that infrastructure is being built that is going to lock in these very high emissions.
More of my conversation with Elizabeth Kolbert after this short break.
Across New England, commercial businesses of all sizes rely on Eastern Bank. We help clients grow by being able to answer their larger loan needs and by offering innovative solutions, smart decision-making, and one-on-one relationships. From franchise financing to community development and asset-based lending, our knowledgeable and experienced commercial team deeply understands your business and the communities you serve. See how we can help you meet your business goals at easternbank.com/commercial.
This is what it sounds like.
Member FDIC.
In a divided world, the one thing everyone seems to agree on is that the media is some kind of conspiracy.
And here's the thing. Media is a conspiracy, just not the one everyone thinks it is.
I'm Naima Raza.
I'm Ben Smith.
And this is Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media. Every Friday between now and November, we're going to pull back the curtain on the stories everyone is talking about.
Exploring how money, politics, culture, and access shape everything you read, watch, and listen to.
Mixed Signals, a look inside modern media from people inside the machine.
Listen on Spotify.
You also have a chapter on weather, W for weather, and some also kind of eye-popping statistics about how the number of weather disasters has surged from about 3 a year in the 1980s to 23 last year. And, we, of course, in the headlines, we read a lot about floods, mega droughts, and here in Boston, snowless winters. This is I think the second winter in a row where we have not had to use the snowblower. We've had so little snow in Boston. I mean, do you think the kind of dramatic changes in weather, do you think that will serve as a wake-up call to the world to take climate change seriously?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you asked that, because the figures just recently came out for 2023, which was a record-breaking year on just many, many fronts. The number of billion-dollar weather-related disasters went up to 28.
Oh, wow.
So we just keep breaking records year after year. Now, is this going to be the wake-up call? I am, old enough to remember, after Katrina, people said, is this the wake-up call? After Superstorm Sandy, is this the wake-up call? I mean, they are alarm bells going off. The fires in Texas, is that the wake-up call? But unfortunately, it seems like people are quite dug in so that it's very difficult to break through that. And I don't know, if you went to talk to the ranchers in Texas whose livelihoods have been destroyed, and those fires, they are not, quote unquote, caused by climate change, but they were definitely made much, much more likely by climate change. What would they say? I would like to hear their thoughts on climate change, if they've changed at all, in the wake of those fires.
I guess our attention spans are really short. I mean, you just ticked off all those disasters I forgot about, but you're right. We thought Katrina was the wake-up call. We thought Hurricane Sandy was the wake-up call, right? But here we are.
Another point that's really important to make, and why climate scientists have been, pulling their hair out, it goes back 20, 30, 40 years now, is it's not the kind of issue where if you say, okay, that was a terrible disaster, now we're going to get our act together. You don't get the old climate back. You never get that climate back really effectively. We just keep moving in one direction, and people really have to understand that even once were we to get our act together and do what we need to do in terms of completely changing out our energy systems, we're still not going back to snowy winters. We're not going back. And that, I think, people really need to understand.
Mm-hmm. So the shortest chapter of your book is D is for despair. And it's just one sentence. Despair is unproductive. Why did you feel the need to include that in your book?
Well, I do think, the book was also, it's addressed both to people who, don't read a lot about climate change, but also people who do and who are very worried about it. And I think that anyone who spends time, thinking about climate change and really trying to think through, what needs to be done, you hit a wall at some point, and you think, well, this just is hopeless, and I give up. And I sort of wanted to both address that and push through that.
But the title of your book is about hope. H is for hope. So talk to me about that. Are you hopeful when it comes to climate change?
Well, I'm agnostic on the issue of hope. How's that? I think that, on some level, the title is sort of playing with that question. I think that on some level, we need to put aside both despair and hope and just do the very hard work, technical work. It's not even as inspirational as, we're going to go to the moon, as JFK said, not because it is easy, but because it is difficult. We're going to have to tackle climate change, not because it is easy, but because it is difficult and because, our lives depend on it. And if not our lives, our kids' lives, absolutely.
And do you think hope, maybe you should sell hope, because when we think about climate change, it can be so overwhelming.
Yeah.
All you go to is despair. So, don't you have to peddle hope?
I guess what I don't want to peddle is this notion that, you should be hopeful. It's just going to happen. Don't worry. I want to peddle some sense that everyone has a responsibility to participate in this transformation to the best of their ability.
One thing that was very sobering in your book was this idea that climate change cannot be reversed. All we can do is really slow it down. But I wonder what happens 100 years from now. I know my kids will probably be okay on this earth, but what about their kids? Will they need to live on Mars? Is this where this is all heading?
We can do more than slow it down. We could sort of stabilize the climate at a new, warmer level. We can't go backwards, but we could stop things sort of where they are. Now, that would require us to reach, what is called net zero. So we're not putting up any more carbon into the atmosphere than is being drawn out by forests and the oceans. We are, a long, long, long way from that, but that could be done. In terms of what is the world going to look like 100 years from now, I am very frightened to think about that. I think the possibilities are anywhere from, okay, to, really bad, really very difficult for humanity, which now consists of 8 billion people, to feed itself. We're changing where the bread baskets are going to be. We're changing the availability of water. We're changing the monsoons. We are tinkering with the most basic systems that we depend on, not what the doctor ordered. Then you have this, well, is there some escape hatch? Are we going to go to Mars? Well, unfortunately for us, we evolved to live on Earth. Really, almost no matter what we did, it would still be an easier place for humans to live on than Mars. Mars has no air pressure, for example. Now imagine living with no air pressure. Your whole body basically would, explode. So you can't go outside on Mars. So it's basically insane to think that we're going to live on Mars.
Wait, why are we going to Mars then?
Yeah, we're going to Mars out of some, crazy ass fantasy. Really, that's why we're going to Mars.
Okay, so Mars should not be our plan B.
Scratch that off your list. Yeah.
Okay, this has been a lot. I mean, we're almost out of time. I mean, how do we end this conversation? Where should we leave this?
Well, there's an interesting study that came out recently, and I think it has an interesting message. And the message from that study was that the one narrative, I suppose you could say, that seems to unite people and transcend these terrible political divides is we need to protect what we love. And I think that that really speaks to people in New England. We live in a beautiful part of the world, and there are many things that we all value, from the shore to the Berkshires to the White Mountains, and we need to protect what we love.
Mm-hmm. I love that sentiment, because even for someone like me, I do want to get more active thinking about climate change, because I want Earth to be around for my kids. My kids are 11 and 13. I want them to live safely and happily on Earth, and they might not, right?
Exactly. I think that should motivate every parent out there.
Yeah. Elizabeth, thank you for being on the show. Elizabeth Kolbert is an author and a writer for The New Yorker. Her latest book is out now. It's called H is for Hope. Thank you, Elizabeth, for being on Say More.
Thanks so much for having me.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. Today's episode was produced by Anna Kusmer with help from Scott Hellman. Our editor is Jim Dow. Our engineer is Uzair Ahmed. Our music is from APM Music. If you like the show, please follow us and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Shirley Leung. Thanks for listening.
How does an actress find the perfect accent for her character? How do members of an indie rock band figure out their harmonies? How does a crossword puzzle creator come up with clues? You'll find the answers to these questions and many more on Working, the podcast about how creative professionals get stuff done. Join me, June Thomas, and my co-hosts Isaac Butler and Ronald Young Jr. as we learn how writers outline novels, how composers get jobs and get paid, and how YouTube creators learn how to look into the camera lens. Listen to Working from Slate every Sunday, wherever you listen.
Are you looking for ideas to make your life happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative? Listen to Happier with Gretchen Rubin, a weekly podcast hosted by two sisters. I'm Gretchen Rubin, the #1 best-selling author of The Happiness Project.
And I'm Elizabeth Kraft, a Hollywood showrunner. Each week we share fresh insights and practical solutions, such as follow the 1-minute rule, choose a one-word theme for the year, or design your summer.
Listen and follow the podcast Happier with Gretchen Rubin.